Well, thank you so much, Andrew, for accepting our invitation to talk to the audience of The Gap in Between. It is really an honor to have you. You have so much experience in the sustainability field that really we are looking forward to your insights and perspectives. You have written several books. Last one, this Net Positive. I have a Spanish translation with me, and it's great. There are many things that you cover, but I would like to start with Net Positive itself. We know that sustainability is in the agenda of many corporations, organizations. Many are working towards how to reduce the negative impact. But your vision of the future is one of net positive. So what is net positive?
Well, gracias. Muchas gracias por invitarme a este importante evento. Thank you for having me to this. I'm pleased to be a part of it. So net positive is something that my partner in the book, Paul Pullman, who was the CEO of Unilever, he and I, really believe that the pace of change, the scale and speed of business isn't really fast enough for our problems, in particular climate change, and that we need companies that are healing the world, that are building regenerative outcomes. So a net positive company is one that profits and grows by solving the world's problems, not by creating them, and one that improves the well-being of everybody that they impact throughout their value chain, through their suppliers and customers. And the question we really ask is, is the world better off because your business is in it? And I find that makes people stop and think a little bit about their job and their career and the company itself. And can we say that it's having a positive impact? And that's the goal.
Mm-hmm. There are different aspects that you cover in the book around capitalism, we can say, or how is this affecting the problems that we are facing and the role of capitalism also in solving them. Especially, well, I would like to ask you about one, which is the short-term view that corporations and also investors, because we at Socialist Foundation, we work with corporations, but also investors, about the importance of thinking. When you think about impact, it's about a longer term view, right? So how can corporations and investors change this short-term view to a longer term view? What can they do?
Well, look, it is the main problem. It's the core hurdle in the way of thinking about your impacts in a broader way, thinking in the longer term is that, we've all been taught that the purpose of business really is short-term shareholder profit. And there's a lot that philosophy has brought the world. We've grown as an economy. Billions of people have gotten wealthier in the last 50 to 100 years, but it's clearly using up our resources and damaging the planet's ability to support us. So the challenge is, how do you bring a longer term kind of broader view back into business? It's not easy, right? You need to be, I think, in open discussions with your major stakeholders, with your investors. For public companies, the challenge is, I think, finding the investors who believe in a longer term value model. I think for all of us as citizens, it's about, do we vote for and support the kinds of politicians and CEOs and companies that take a longer view? Because you can do a lot for short-term profit creation, but it usually sacrifices something about the future, right? It uses up something that we need in the future. So I think taking a longer-term view is easier in partnership, working with others, working with your peers, working with your suppliers and customers to think about the value to the whole system. And look, these are challenging ideas. It's not easy, but we can, I think, together challenge the kind of base concept that we have to be maximizing things for this month or this quarter. That isn't actually very healthy for the business or for society.
Mm-hmm. We will talk about partnerships later. I wanted to ask you about ESG, which it's a term that it's in the corporate world, also in the investment world. You have a different perspective of what ESG is or should be. Can you please share it with us?
Sure. I've been in this overlap of business and society for over 20 years, and I've seen a lot of terms, a lot of words that are used for this area. ESG is certainly the hottest term and the one that's taken over in recent years, but it really is a financial world idea, right? Environmental, social, and governance are categories of things that the investment world is looking to companies to measure and take stock and see if there's any risk to the business. It's a fairly narrow view. Sustainability is a much broader conversation about the role of business in society and how does the business affect the world. ESG is more of an investor's metric. How is the company affected by these issues, and is the company riskier as an investment? And that's one question, but it's not really the full picture. So a company could be rated highly as an ESG leader from an investment perspective, but maybe not be doing all that in reality to improve their footprint and to improve how they impact the world. So it's kind of a one-dimensional view.
Mm-hmm. When we are talking about transitioning to better world somehow, we are talking about different levels of change, right? There's this systemic change that need to happen, right, but there's also below that organizational change, and also the change that at an individual level we need to take, right? At the end of the day, corporation systems, organizations are composed by people. So what is the change that individuals, that leaders need to embrace? What are the characteristics that a net positive leader has?
Right. Well, I think it's easy to believe that companies, the leaders that drive the change are really just the CEO or just the senior, but really there are leaders within organizations at all levels, right? We all have groups that we have influence on, or managers of particular areas. And I think the key things that make for a net positive leader, one is really just courage, the principles, based in your own sense of purpose, your own sense of duty, to have the courage to say we can do more, we can be more, and the courage, I think, to reach out to others, to share that you have problems that the business is facing, that the world is facing, and you don't necessarily know how to solve them. I mean, we have big shared problems, and it takes courage, I think, to reach out to partners or to NGOs, to critics, and say, how can we work together? Do you have any ideas? How do we solve these problems? And I think, it takes also some level of humility to be humble as a leader and say, these problems are big. We can't solve them alone. Those are things that are not often rewarded, I think, in current business, right? We have a CEO culture of saying, everything, you can fix everything. And I think it takes a different kind of approach to say we should be humble in the face of what are some really tough challenges, and humble about how much business can do alone and its need for society, for its stakeholders, for employees, for governments, that we really have to come together, that this is going to require a belief in partnership. And that's kind of the other key element of a leader, is the belief in partnering and kind of trusting others to work together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wanted to talk about partnerships, in fact, because in the book you mention about partnerships in the terms that 1 + 1 = 11, and also you talk about systemic partnerships. So what are those?
Yeah, so the book really at core is about partnership, that is what's needed to solve our challenges. And so we have two really big categories, as you said. One is, what we call 1 + 1 = 11, the idea that you can get more out of working with each other to optimize or maximize, kind of within the current system. So it could be companies coming together to harmonize how they do shipping and logistics, and have some common sizes. We use an example of the pallets that companies ship in, like just something as simple as, let's agree to how we will ship our products in this sector. You can then pack so many more products in a truck. It's much more efficient. You're saving energy, you're saving money. So there's, little things like that, up to attempts by sectors to try new methods. So there's a partnership called Loop that's going on in cities around the world, where big brands are providing their products in similar packaging. They've agreed to the particular types of packaging that is reusable. So they might be metal containers instead of plastic. You send them back to the company when you're done using the personal care product or the food that you've eaten, and they wash it out and send it back out into the system. These are the kinds of experiments and tests that are going on to try to really reduce the impact of a particular sector or a particular value chain. The larger problems, the really big challenges, require not just having your peers and similar companies, but working with civil society and NGOs and with governments to think about what are the policies that we need. So it isn't just let's work on packaging together, but what are the laws or regulations we need to build a better recycling system or better availability of different materials. Those kinds of systemic solutions that help everyone really require a different level of partnership and a comfort in companies in working kind of equally and in a trusting way with your critics from NGOs and with the governments that most companies believe they're supposed to fight, right? They believe their job is to fight all regulation. And I think that's not serving us anymore, right? It's not good enough to just say, we want a tax break, or we want, government regulation out of our way. We have to come to some agreements together and set the right kinds of policies that will help the whole system move to a much better, much more sustainable place.
No, definitely. We totally agree. That's why here in the audience, we have entrepreneurs, we have nonprofit organizations, corporations, investors, public administration, citizens, right? Which sometimes we need to bring them more into this type of conversations and looking into solutions. So what do you think is the role of civil society also in all the net positive movement?
Well, I think there's us as citizens, individually, and then the role of NGOs and groups that have really, I think, very passionate views on these things and often bring knowledge. One of the kind of core examples of a systemic partnership we use in the book is the problem of palm oil, which is one of the largest emitters of carbon emissions in the world. We cut down trees in Indonesia, Malaysia, and elsewhere to grow palm oil, for the palm oil that goes into a lot of our food, a lot of our personal care products. And so it took, business not just demanding suppliers be more sustainable, but actually working with NGOs like Greenpeace or World Wildlife Fund that had better practices, had some good science that could help farmers increase their yields. And so coming together with those, inviting those NGOs in, and then bringing in finance and government and all the other partners has helped reduce deforestation in Indonesia and elsewhere. It really required that kind of listening to each other. But then just on a personal level, like people as members of civil society, we have a role as individuals for, how we buy, how we shop every day, where do we vote with our feet, what kinds of products do we buy, what kind of companies do we support, either through the things we buy or who we go work for. That's probably the biggest power we have, is just in general as employees. That has incredible influence on business. And then at the larger level, who do we vote for? Are we voting for the politicians that want the right policies, that want to tackle climate change and inequality and help solve these really big problems? That's our biggest role, really, as a active, aware citizen who knows what's going on and knows who's going to help us get there.
Mm-hmm. So, well, before we close this conversation, Andrew, the summit is called the Gap in Between. So we know that in this field, there are many gaps, like gender gap, diversity gap, funding gaps. And also we wanted to provide this perspective of the gap if we see our lives since we are born until we leave this world, there's a time where we live, and what can we do to leave the world better? So my question is around what should we do, or how we must close the gap towards a more sustainable, inclusive, and climate conscious world?
Yeah, it's a real look. It's the key question, right? It's the hardest question: is how do we open up and create a much more inclusive society? It is, I mean, there's these barriers in the way in most of our societies that have made inequality kind of a built-in dimension of how we do. You know, we mentioned capitalism earlier, like modern capitalism, it has inequality built in. So I think there's something about kind of challenging the story we've all been told, you know, that the purpose of business is short-term shareholder profits, or that the purpose of a government or a society is just the GDP, the stock market price. Like we've really gone very deep into this idea that, you know, money and financial metrics is the only measure of well-being, when we all know in our day-to-day lives that having a job, having an income is critical, right? It's critical to our well-being, but it isn't all that makes us who we are, and it isn't all of what makes us happy. So I think there's kind of a deep questioning we need to do now about meaning and what makes us happy in the world. And is it just more and more stuff? Because the planet can't really take that. And is it being in a kind of exclusive way and only operating in circles that you already recognize and you're comfortable with? Or is it opening up and bringing people together of every background, every belief system? And I think that's the challenge, is how do we open the system up and listen to each other in a really, you know, and fundamentally open our hearts to understand each other, to love each other, and to see, you know, business as an outgrowth of us as humans, not as something that controls us, that controls how we interact. I think we have to put the humanity really back into our economies and our businesses and our interactions, and realize it's about people, right? It's not about money. And I think if you focus business more on people, we will get to a much more inclusive and sustainable place.
Well, in the book, you mentioned that the cost of inaction is far greater than the cost of action. Right. So I'm going to take this call to action that you just gave us about opening up, thinking about meaning and changing narratives and collaborating as our call to action to take it today. So thank you so much, Andrew, for your interesting really perspectives, insights, and yeah, looking forward to see you soon, maybe in person. Thank you.
I'd love to. Thanks so much for having me. Muchas gracias.
Gracias.